Yo, how you guys doing? Delete Lawz. So pay very close attention to the things I'm going to show you right now. Every single detail of what I'm going to show you exposes the thin blue line. This guy is named Sheriff Jared Rigby. Rigby is in Utah. You see the look on his face? He is an absolute, complete and utter blue line thug. I'm going to expose everything. You're going to have to follow a lot of little pieces of information. Let me give you an introduction to what's going on with him, and then I'll come right back. If you follow this, you will see how corrupt policing is and how corrupt the people in your community are that are supporting police. What I'm going to show you is unbelievable, and it's right now in 2023.
Wasatch County is allowing Sheriff Jared Rigby to take back his resignation. Rigby originally planned to step down as sheriff to accept a position as the director of peace officer standards and training. But on Monday, his appointment to that job was indefinitely postponed because of a Fox 13 News video showing how Rigby is accused of bullying and intimidating a police witness. Rigby was recently reelected to the sheriff position in November. It was over the weekend. He wrote that he is fully committed to his work at the sheriff's office, but it's unclear if he would step down a second time if the state decides to still allow him to serve as post director.
This is on January 11th, 2023, that video you just saw. So now let me show you something else. Let me show you the very beginning of this story. Wasatch County is going to need a new sheriff with its current leader of the country on its way to state position. Despite having just been elected to a second term Tuesday, Wasatch County Sheriff Jared Rigby is on his way out. This week, before the election, Rigby accepted a new job as director of Utah Peace Officer Standard and Training. No comment as post. In his new role, he'll oversee the branch of the Utah Public Safety in charge of training, certificates, investigations, and all Utah law enforcement. He says he'll continue to live in Wasatch County and his family, but he'll miss his colleagues. I love working there for more than 20 years. The sheriff has been good to me and their families, and all of our deputies and dispatchers and all the other employees. They're awesome friends, blah, blah, blah. So he's leaving. And there's Rigby right there, so you can get a good look at him. Total blue line thug. Total blue line thug. You're looking into the eyes of a man who would cheat you to protect a cop 1,000 times out of 1,000.
For the past few weeks, people have been wondering how Wasatch County Sheriff Jared Rigby was nominated for a powerful state position. He continues to face allegations of bullying and intimidating a police officer. But now a member of the board that selected him says she thinks Rigby's nomination was rigged.
Fox 13 News investigative reporter Adam Herbets joins us live in studio tonight with the letter that board members sent months ago. Adam.
Yeah, Bob Kelly, the council member who wrote this letter says at the time she didn't know anything about the witness intimidation complaint against Rigby, but she thought something was wrong and wanted it on the record. She felt the entire process was set up from the get-go.
To say that he's an exceptional man is an understatement.
Sheriff Jared Rigby sat and watched.
Jared is a truly ethical man who...
Okay, so understand something. These guys are towing the thin blue line. Every guy you hear speaking on behalf of Jared is towing the thin blue line. The reason why people hate cops and hate the thin blue line is everything you're going to see here.
Holds great integrity.
As his friends, family, colleagues, and members of his church defended his character.
The scriptures say, "Ye shall know them by their fruits." Well, that's a good man.
He also listened to the criticism from people who say this 93-minute video should have stopped him from ever being considered for a state position in charge of investigating officers across Utah.
There is no excessive use of force. And so your perception is wrong.
Rigby is accused of bullying and intimidating an officer who reported the Heber City chief of police for grabbing a handcuffed suspect by the throat.
We've been taught specifically to not grab people by the throat.
I disagree. You've been taught to not do a chokehold.
What you're saying is not changing my perspective of what I saw. Nothing's going to change that. That's why we're here, right?
Yeah. Well,
Because
Lucas, it really comes down to the future, your future in the police department. So you can dig in your heels and say,
and that's not what I'm doing.
this is how I feel and no one's going to change. And okay, that's your decision. You just won't get any trusted positions.
Was the advice stern? Yeah. But every time I yell at my son in the shower in the morning saying get to school, it's very stern.
Most of the committee said they had never seen the video. Park City Police Chief Wade Carpenter now says he saw parts of it, but never thought it was appropriate to bring up as part of Rigby's interview process.
Our role is not investigative, even though some of us have that ability. That is not our role.
The Utah Department of Public Safety disagreed, stopping the appointment from going through just days before Rigby's swearing-in ceremony. Now the decision lies with Governor Spencer Cox.
If there is something you care about, I need you to reach out to your legislators.
Miley Liu was the only person who voted against Rigby in October. About a week later, she wrote this letter. I wanted on the record that I felt the entire process and recommendation of Rigby was a setup from the get-go.
Rigged to give police power.
It was very obvious to me from the get-go that Chief Carpenter and the 5 members on the interview panel knew who they wanted, and it was all a staged process.
He was very well aware of the case and what was going on within his neighboring county there and the situation.
Chief Carpenter has attended at least 2 closed-door meetings with the governor's office to lobby on behalf of Rigby.
Scumbag.
Good morning. How are you?
Sheriff Nate Curtis was also part of the 6-member
Scumbag.
search committee. He said he will not confirm or deny whether he had seen the video before Rigby's interview because, quote, I don't think it matters.
This guy's in charge of training cops. All Utah police officers, all of them. And wait till you see what Rigby does to somebody who files a report on his captain.
I have a huge bias in favor of Sheriff Jared Rigby. He is my brother-in-law. I appreciate the value of the media in our world, and if there needs to be more process, let it be, but let it be fair.
Well, Bob Kelly, today we asked that Post council member who wrote that letter if she would be willing to speak with us. She said no, but she did tell the rest of her colleagues on Post council during that meeting, it's time to be transparent. To that Post council member who wrote that letter.
It says, for the past several weeks, Fox has been asking about how Jared Rigby was nominated for after intimidation. Miley Liu, who you saw, I wanted on the record, I felt the entire process of the recommendation of Rigby was set up from the get-go, Liu wrote. For me, it's all about the principle of the process. Liu said she didn't know anything about witness intimidation against Rigby until months after her writing her letter October 19th. She was the only member of Post to train all the cops to vote against Rigby in October. 3 other members of Post councils wanted to recommend more than one candidate, but records show they were outvoted. My experience of 35 years in public education hiring review process is deep, Liu wrote. This is the second time in my career I felt this is, and am taking the same action of letting my voice be heard. Liu's letter specifically named Chief Wade Carpenter of the Park City Police Department, who also serves as chairman of the Post. So the cops are on the boards to elect which cops. Do you understand? So that thin blue line, that wall of silence that we read about in the Mullen Commission, it was very obvious to me that Chief Wade Carpenter and the 5 members of the interview panel knew prior it was all a staged process. I felt that Deputy Director Alex Garcia and candidate number 3 did not have a shot with the majority and the Post members, which is why I wanted to push candidate 1, 2, and 3 up to allow Utah Department of Public Safety Commissioner Jess Anderson to pick. Carpenter told News he's seen clips of the video. He stated he thought it would not be appropriate to mention just because somebody makes a complaint against someone doesn't mean it's legitimate. Carpenter said, one of the cops who's on the Post board to elect the new cop, the role is not investigated. Even though some of us have the ability, that is not our role. That's not what we're here for. Our role is to find the best applicant to protect the integrity of the Post. Such garbage. Oh my freaking God. Wait till you see the way Rigby treats one of his officers who filed a report on his captain, not even a complaint. And they go into very specific detail. Now let's watch his whole video. It's an hour and a half. I may pause it and say something now and then, but I'm not going to. I want you guys to watch this entire video. Watch every second of this.
Hey everyone, this is Adam Herbets, investigative reporter with Fox 13 News, and what you're about to see is the full 92-minute, 57-second video of Sheriff Jared Rigby interviewing Officer Lucas McTaggart. Now, the reason we are releasing this is because on Friday night, Sheriff Rigby published 2 selfie videos, essentially accusing us of taking his statements out of context. Anytime anyone accuses us of taking them out of context, we take that very seriously. And that's why our standard practice is to publish the full interview so that people can decide for themselves. Now, before you watch it, one thing we noticed is as the video goes on, it starts to become more and more out of sync between the video and the audio. We assume the reason for that is because of some sort of technical issue with Sheriff Rigby's body camera. But rather than trying to edit or fix that, we are showing you the full unedited clip exactly as it came to us. So take a look at it. If you have any questions, feel free to drop a question in the comments. We will be answering those. And we will tonight, during our regularly scheduled 9 o'clock newscast, be doing a follow-up story. We hope you watch.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's September 1st, 2021, about 7:10 in the morning. So what we want to do is provide you some intro to what it is we're doing, ask some questions, and you're welcome to ask questions throughout. Ultimately, we want to talk about a written statement as well. That's kind of overall the big picture of what we're here to do. So we're doing an internal affairs investigation for Heber City Police Department. I've been asked by the mayor to do that. This has to do with the Jesse Rodriguez incident on March 31st, 2021. And as part of that, I think we're all on the same page, but just to make sure, there was already a criminal investigation of this. So there are actually 2. So one focused on Jesse James Rodriguez, and the other one focused on whether there were criminal violations of excessive use of force. And so the Rodriguez one is still ongoing in court, and the other one is that there's no criminal charges pertaining to officers. So when it comes to this interview and us doing, whether it's an IA or you want to call it an administrative review or whatever it is, it's the same thing. So this isn't a Garrity interview. Okay. So Garrity interviews, generally speaking, are meant when there are criminal charges that could potentially be on the table, or at least an investigation is ongoing or could be ongoing. Or, actually could be an and or, but there's concerns about a person's propensity to tell the truth. So there's some question as to whether they're making inconsistent statements or false statements. And if that was the case, then Garrity can be given to make it perfectly clear that there is an obligation on the employee's part to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, kind of an idea. And so Garrity provides protections to an employee, like in your spot, having to do with potential criminal investigation. Doesn't say crimes can't be brought if Garrity is given, but instead is saying anything that we were to talk about here cannot be shared with criminal investigators. Well, there's already been a criminal investigation conducted. We know there's no crimes that are going to come of that. And so at least that piece is not on the table, and so we won't do it. If
We know no cops are going to be charged with any crimes no matter what he says.
we're concerned about your ability to tell the truth, or we questioned any of those things, then we would also consider giving Garrity. But we're not in that boat. So you're not in trouble. I don't anticipate anything here causing you some kind of a disciplinary. I know lots of times officers get concerned about the consequences of what they say, meaning how that affects them with their coworkers.
Absolutely telling him that he's going to be retaliated against.
And I do get that, kind of the informal, kind of between officers, crews, supervisors. Are they going to be upset with me? Any of those kinds of things. So it's not a criminal investigation. It's not a Garrity interview. At least at this point, we have no reason to do that. With that said, there's always the expectation when an employee is meeting with their employer, or here we are in place of your employer, to tell the truth and the whole truth and not exaggerate and not leave anything out and not embellish anything. So we don't need Garrity for that. An employee can be disciplined just because they're not telling the truth, and it can be corroborated other ways without Garrity.
So he's reporting someone being choked, and if his story can't be corroborated, well, then he can get in trouble.
Another piece to all of that is that if we felt like we needed to stop the interview, do a Garrity interview, and we'd do that. We'd stop, just restart, and we'd give Garrity admonitions. Hey, these are the warnings and admonitions. These are your rights under it as well. Do you have any questions so far?
I'm sure they'll be answered.
So we don't want you to question the credibility or the authenticity of us talking to you. So if you want to be calling Jim Moore at this point in time to make sure that all this is really legit and that we're asking questions on behalf of Heber City Police Department, we can do that.
That's not necessary.
So really the interview is meant to kind of have an introduction, get it out on the table, and then for us to ask some questions that are pretty specific. So we've already seen the body cam that people have. We've seen the reports, also the DPS interviews. So all that's in our minds. So lots of times in an interview we'll say, so start from the beginning and tell us about this thing. And that's just not where we're at with this at this point in time. It's just kind of a waste of your time. And so we're just going to start into some questions that are really kind of having to do with one part of the overall incident. And it's not even anything having to do with being in the house and being with Jesse James Rodriguez and then moving on to the gurney and then going to the cage and all that kind of stuff. So I don't think you need to feel like we're we don't have that as the basis because we've been over all of that. And if we were to just go over it here, it just is kind of needless because we're really focused on the questions that we have. And we just don't want to waste your time having you think, is it having to do with all this kind of stuff? It's like, we can tell where there's policy concerns in these areas. Okay. Any questions so far?
We don't want to take time out of your CIT training, so that's why we're going to cut straight to the meat of the subject. It's very kind of you. Why? You're welcome. Very welcome.
All right. So, when it comes to how all of the concern came about, our concern has to do with inconsistent and false statements, not on your part. And so the first question really that we have is, we know that you're the FTO to Adrian Gondaria on this call, March 31st, 2021, right? Mm-hmm. Liberty Station, Jesse Rodriguez. And then from there end up being concerns in the police department about how it was handled, specifically whether there was excessive use of force, and even more specifically, whether Dave Booth used any excessive use of force. So what do you know, or what was your involvement in after March 31st and that incident, and then discussion with others? I'm leaving the others open at this point in time. We can narrow down more on officers, supervisors, spouse, people outside the office, but all of that's on the table right now. What was your discussion about the incident with others, generally speaking?
It's been a while, so I don't 100% recall timing on everything or anything like that, but I know I discussed with, I think, 3 other officers.
Who have you talked to? Who have you talked to? Who have you told about us?
And I discussed with a supervisor.
Okay, is the supervisor one of the 3 officers or separate?
Separate.
Okay, can you tell us more about the officers and the supervisor?
What are you looking for?
Names, times, what's best to your recollection?
Now he wants him to tell him who he told about him seeing his captain put his hands on another guy's neck who was in torture cuffs. Who are they?
I believe I talked about it with Rojo, Richard, and I actually want to say Weischer, but that was kind of random because he was just in the office randomly. And that would have been, like I said, I don't remember timeframes, but it would have been shortly after the incident, like within a couple days.
Accurate to say shortly after incident, within a couple days. Okay. And the supervisor?
Jarvie.
Okay, and what were the circumstances there?
My discussion with my supervisor?
Uh-huh.
I was doing what I was obligated to do by policy based on what I had seen.
So help us understand the circumstances of how that conversation happened.
So the only reason he's reporting is because he believed that the new policies after George Floyd were that he had to say something. Otherwise, he wouldn't have said anything.
So where were you? Kind of the time frame that it happened?
In his office. Time frame still shortly after, but it was after I spoke to the other officers. So within days.
Shortly after the incident, within days after the incident, but also it's after you spoke with these three.
That's how I recall it. It was after that I would have talked to them. It was time for me to look into what I felt like I needed to do.
Okay. And so, is this on were you both working?
I think so. I don't see why I would have been in there otherwise.
So we won't be strong there, but you think you were both working.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And it was just him and I on a crew at that point, so.
Who was on your crew at that time?
Well,
Your statements are weak. You're not strong there.
I was FTOing Adrian. So it's just me. It was just me and Jarvie, and then I was training Adrian.
So just the three of you on that crew, on Jarvie's crew?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So, at that point, you're the only two on the crew, and he is your crew supervisor.
Yes.
Okay. And this happened in Sergeant Jarvie's office. Is it day crew, or sorry, the day shift or night shift?
I don't remember. I could look back. That's right around shift change time. So we started in January on days. Would have been 3 months, so right around the end of March, beginning of April would have been the switch. So I don't remember.
So you think this was within a few days of March 31st. But we also want to be careful not to make it too much. So fairness wise, you think it was for sure within a week? You think it for sure was within 2 weeks? Like maybe 3 weeks?
I mean, I think within a week. It's hard for me to say for sure because it's been a long time, but
pretty confident?
Yes, because I was, it wasn't anything that I sat on for any period of time. It happened. I did my research, talked about it a little bit, and, determined what I thought I needed to do with it and did that.
Okay. The reason why the Rigby is trying to say maybe it was 3 weeks is because there's a statute of limitation. He's supposed to report anything immediately. And even though he says he only waited a few days, Rigby later will hammer him on it.
Okay. Pretty confident the conversation with Jarvie occurred within 1 week of March 31st. Okay. Okay. How long was the conversation?
Couldn't tell you. I mean, it was not super brief. I mean, we sat and chatted for a while, but okay. I don't even know that it was all entirely just on that subject.
Others present besides the two of you?
No.
Adrian
may have been out doing paperwork in the office while the door was closed.
Okay.
I don't.
Door was closed.
If he was in the office, the door would have been closed. It wasn't a conversation I would have had for other people to hear.
Did you consider it a formal conversation?
Yes.
And why would you consider a formal conversation?
Well,
kind of the outward, or what was said?
Not necessarily a formal conversation where it's with my supervisor who I can talk with comfortably. This is more of a formal conversation than that, but formal because it was me doing what I had determined I was required to do by policy, and I made that clear in the conversation. I did my research, I looked into law and policy, and I determined I was required by Heber City policy to report what I had seen to my supervisor. And so I made it clear this is me reporting it to my supervisor.
Okay.
And he was clear on that also.
Okay.
During this conversation, from the way when you spoke with Sergeant Jarvie, was this the first, from your understanding, was this the first that he had heard of this?
From my understanding, yes.
Okay. From the way he acted, from his reaction, from you telling him about this incident, it was the first time he had heard about it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Not about the entire incident, obviously.
No,
or the entire
not
call,
about the
but-
entire incident, but from what you were
Right.
bringing forward to him.
Right, right.
Okay.
Yes.
So what were the concerns that you raised?
That I observed an officer use excessive force. Or what I perceived to be excessive force from where I saw it happen.
Okay. And so you're concerned about Dave Booth using excessive force,
Correct.
and you communicated that to Sergeant Jarvie.
I did.
At what point do you think that Dave Booth used excessive force?
When he put his hand on Jesse's neck and squeezed his neck to put him into the back of, I believe it was Adrian's car, but that patrol car.
So to say it accurately, when we covered, he knew that the recording was going. Okay. When he put his hand on Jesse's neck and squeezed, is that accurate?
Yes.
And put him inside the car. Is that fair to, inaccurate to say it that way?
Yes.
Put him inside the patrol vehicle. Okay. Were there any other concerns that you had about excessive use of force?
Nope.
Anything else, any other concerns that you raised at the time with Sergeant Jarvie having to do with the incident?
Only how to deal with that. Excuse me, how to have that conversation with somebody that I was training to be a new officer who I thought witnessed it, because it was just the three of us there. Everybody else was kind of milling around scene. As you know, there's a lot of people on scene at that point, just the way the previous use of force with Jesse had gone down and the emergency button and everything. But to my recollection and my perception was at that moment, it was Jesse, Chief, Adrian, and me, and kind of our own little world. And so that was, I mean, honestly, that was the most upsetting thing to me about it at the time, was that I was going to have to reconcile that with somebody who I was trying to teach how to be a cop.
So most upsetting, since you were the FTO and you were training a new officer, and it was your job to reconcile. What do you mean when you say reconcile?
I just didn't know how to approach it with him. Do I, obviously a difficult situation where it's chief. If it was another line level officer, yeah, like, hey, this is cut and dry. What you saw happen there was wrong and not the way we do things, and that'll be dealt with, but you don't need to worry about that, but we need to have that conversation. And that's just a little bit more of a difficult conversation.
So
with somebody who's, I mean, it was a difficult situation for me to be in, and I'm experienced, and I have no issue being on a scene with chief and and all of that stuff. And then imagine that from a brand new guy still in training who turns out was having a very hard time in training.
Yeah. So what makes you think, though, that the way
he was having a hard time in training because the policies and practice of police are disgusting and inhumane?
you perceive it is the way that it is? So what I mean by that is you're seeing excessive use of force. That's not your decision. That is a determination that the department will make.
Sure.
And so I like and I appreciate and I respect you going through the process. Hey, I have a concern. You raise it to your sergeant. That's the right thing to do. And maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying here, but the way that it's coming across to me, at least at this point, is that you're feeling like you have to explain to the new employee that the chief just used excessive use of force, and now we got to work through that. Am I misunderstanding that?
You're not. The way that I perceived that, it was pretty cut and dry from what I perceived. I was right there with it, and I didn't see anything, especially with, we've just been told chokeholds are against policy and all, George Floyd and everything else, and people going to prison and all of this stuff. And then we see that happen, and that was very clear to me that was inappropriate.
So
in one way or the other, maybe not. And maybe this is what you're getting at. I'm not saying that, yeah, he committed a crime at that point.
What's a chokehold mean?
Anything applying pressure to the neck. I mean, they're saying George Floyd, they're relating that to a chokehold, and he had a knee on the back of his neck, and you can't stop breathing from the back of the neck.
So
what?
Is that what your policy talks about with chokehold? Is anything that applies pressure to him?
I don't know, honestly. I don't know off the top of my head right now. But and to back up, that wasn't anything on the back of the neck. I mean, I watched his hands squeeze around the front of his neck.
How long do you think that lasted?
I have thought about that because my other concern when I researched what my obligation was is, coming across the duty to intervene. And so I had a second to myself to, should I have stepped in and grabbed Chief's arm and said, hey, quit? I think by time everything processed what was happening, it was done. So I think, and I never saw the video, so I never saw it besides in that moment. But
So this is just your recollection from your eyewitness account. You've never reviewed or watched a video since that?
Not of that part, no. Okay. Video of us fighting with Jesse, but no, not of that part.
Okay.
But I and I'm sorry, maybe I was in the middle of the statement.
So overall, I think whether it's now or sometime in our interview here, I think it's good and it's fine to be talking about whether there's excessive use of force and chokehold and applying pressure and all those kinds of things. So I think that's good. I think that's healthy. We are here representing your department and also their views when it comes to their policy. I mean, that's what we're doing. We're doing an IA, so it's built on policy. And I'm sure there'll be things to come as far as training. But the bottom line is for right now, is it accurate for us to say that at least at that point in time, you felt like you were going to have to reconcile this with the new officer and saying that what the chief's doing there, you can't do that?
Yeah, that was a concern.
All right, so.
And maybe I should say that was a concern of whether I should do that specifically with him or not.
He's only concerned that he's going to violate policy and go to prison for failure to intervene or not reporting. He didn't even file a complaint. He filed a report.
Or how to approach that was my biggest concern, is how to deal with that as his trainer.
Okay. And so, being the representative of the police department at this point in time, I guess the communication is that takes at least part of that off of your shoulders is really it's a determination that the process needs to follow, right? So if through the process it was determined that it's excessive use of force, then you're going to be in that boat.
I understand that, but that's also not valid, because if the law is going to sit and say that an officer is legally required to intervene when there's excessive force being used, that's an in the moment thing, right? So how do I intervene on something that has to be determined by this later process?
But you didn't intervene.
No, I didn't.
So you don't need to get with the officer. If you didn't intervene, then why would you need to get with the officer and tell him?
Because the reason I didn't intervene is because there was not time for me to intervene, because it was done.
Okay. So
what was my perspective of it. And like I said, I had that thought afterwards, should I have intervened? And I realized, this is something that happened so quickly that by the time I processed everything, it wasn't something if that had gone on, it would have been something for me to have intervened.
Did you end up having a conversation with Adrian about it?
A very non-specific conversation.
Okay. So Lucas, help us understand. So you're really concerned about the spot it puts you in, because you're going to have to reconcile this with the officer, but you didn't reconcile it with the officer.
Well, that was my concern immediately on, did he see did Adrian see what I saw? Is he processing what I'm processing? Which I don't know.
His perspective, is it the same or different?
Yeah, I to this day do not know. In that conversation with Jarvie that I had, I also had this conversation about how to approach it with Adrian. And, we kind of determined it was best to have a more broad conversation of there's kind of an old way of doing things and a new way of doing things, and we can't do things like they used to do things, and kind of just one of those conversations. I never specifically sat him down and said, did you see Chief do this? Or I saw Chief do this, and don't do that. It was never specifically discussed with Adrian like that.
So did Adrian ever bring up the issue of any type of misdoing by anyone during the time that Jesse was put into the car?
No.
So he never did come to you and say, listen, I'm concerned, or during this conversation that you had of old school, new school, there was nothing brought up by Adrian as far as any concerns?
No, but he wasn't really one to bring stuff up. He was kind of just doing this for the whole time.
Okay.
Through FTO,
No, I get you.
Or his part of FTO.
Okay.
All right.
So and maybe I'm not, I don't know, maybe I'm not communicating it well. I take pride in training new officers in that position and the importance of that position. And so I guess that was me having Adrian there was just something else onto that issue. That issue would have been that issue with just me there. And I saw what I saw independent of Adrian. And then on top of all of that, on what I was, figuring out what I needed to do, what our policy said, what the law said, I had the thought, Adrian was there too and was in a position where he could have saw exactly what I saw. So how, do I need to have that conversation with him, and how specifically do I need to have that conversation with him?
So when did you have the conversation with Adrian?
Either that day that I talked to Jarvie or within the next shift or two, quickly after.
Within a day or two of speaking.
If you watch Rigby, he grimaces every time he tells him that he talked to another person. He grimaces and cringes.
And so you'd said above that you're pretty confident that you met with Jarvie in a few days, for sure a week, of March 31st. So this is still kind of within the first week or two. Would that be accurate to say?
He just added a week when earlier he said, no, I got it done within a week. We just heard him say, oh no, I researched it, talked to a couple people, and I got it done. Now he's saying a week or two. There's a reason.
March 31st. Okay. Where did the conversation with Adrian happen?
I don't remember. Either in a patrol car or in our office.
And was it more of a kind of a formal conversation where it's just kind of you and him? It's not like at break and then it kind of comes up, or help us understand this.
It was just me and him, but it's, one of those FTO conversations that we have all the time.
Yeah, could be,
So, we were having those conversations consistently. So it wasn't, I'm sure it wasn't anything. It was just another learning moment from his perspective.
Well, and when you were doing it, were you talking specifically about the March 31st Jesse James Rodriguez incident?
I'm sure I was. I can't, I don't remember the exact conversation I had with Adrian, but we did have a lot of conversation about that just because he was involved in a use of force with Jesse. And so there was a lot. And if I remember right, that was like his first day of FTO. So there was a lot of conversation surrounding all of that incident that had taken place and took place for a while.
So were there any other parts of that incident that you considered to be old school versus there's a different way of doing it now?
No.
So just that piece. Dave Booth, his hand on Jesse's neck, squeezing.
I mean, the old school thing is just kind of how I came up with to maybe have that conversation. I mean, that's excessive force isn't old school. It happens. So I don't know. I don't want to label it as that was being old school. I'm sure that happens, in policing right now. So
overall, I guess my point, just to be clear about it, is on behalf of the police department, they don't see that as a conversation for an FTO to have with their new officer and making a determination that wasn't the way to do it. That can work for other things, but not for something like this. Because if you're going to go and talk with your sergeant, because you're getting it off your shoulders, this is something that's important, and policy requires that I go and do this thing, there's a process for figuring that out.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't sit with an officer, and it doesn't sit with a sergeant, and it goes up like it did.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately it goes to the chief's supervisor.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a criminal investigation on it, and then the decision on that. And then there's an IA that's done on it, and then there's a decision on that. And what has been done, or at least it somewhat looks like it's been done, is, well, Adrian's already been told that that was not the way to be doing it. Although it wasn't specific, it was just generalized that wasn't the way to be doing things. So I don't know if that's, if you agree with it, but that is the police department's view on that issue. And so from here, you could probably have more conversation with supervisors and hear it straight from them and be like, oh, okay, I guess maybe next time I should do it differently, or maybe they want me to tweak it just some, and maybe I can keep part of what I did. Any questions about that? It's not that you have to agree. It's just the way that it is.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I guess questions on where that's coming from, because I feel like you're obviously already prepared with that information you just gave me, right?
What's that?
That whole speech, just barely, that you just gave me about how I handled it and that my department thinks it's wrong. I mean, I'm assuming that sounds like it was something that came from you before the conversation.
No. He told him he's not supposed to talk to his field training officer about his perception of what excessive use of force is, that it's not his position to have those kinds of conversations, is what he says. It's unbelievable.
We just had.
No, that is me hearing this for the first time.
Okay.
And applying what I know.
Okay.
And then me going back to them and saying, this is the statement I made on your behalf.
Okay.
That's what it is. And then they'll honor it.
Sure.
Because that's what we're doing here, is that we're doing this on their behalf. So.
Well, then maybe it needs to be more clear that I in no way threw Chief under the bus to Adrian. I mean, that was why I made it a point to do that, is that was me trying to have a conversation on, I guess, appropriate use of force or whatever that may be, without throwing Chief under the bus, knowing, having seen what I'd seen.
Okay.
So remember, when he started this, he said, we have a very specific scope of questions. And so far, all they've asked him is who he talked to, where he talked to them, what he told them. But there's been no questions about how bad did he choke the guy? Did he cut off the blood supply to the brain? How'd that go? None of that. This is about him having a perception on what excessive use of force is, and then who he talked to about it.
Zero intent. And I don't believe that I did. Obviously, that's up to Adrian's perspective of the conversation that I had with him, so I can't speak for that. But I had absolutely no intent to
You're
even,
trying to be careful with that part.
Yeah, that's why it was difficult. It was a hard
Still
thing.
trying to do this conversation and talk and teach and mentor and move forward.
Right.
Okay, got it. I'll make sure that part's in there. So you didn't mention the chief at all because you said you didn't get specific?
I don't.
He did mention the chief to Adrian and that he saw the chief choke him. And this Russian mafioso gangster just said, oh, so I'll put that in there for you, that you were just talking about, training him and stuff. But you didn't say anything with the chief, did you? And then he says, no, I didn't. Yes, he did.
At all, because you said you didn't get specific?
I don't know whether I mentioned chief or if I.
Yes, you do.
If I did mention chief, I didn't mention chief.
Yes, you
He
did.
did something wrong. I definitely didn't ever bring up anything like this. It was a broad general conversation of there's a correct way to do things. So I don't know if I brought up chief or not.
Yes, you did.
Anything more on that point?
No, not on that point.
Okay.
The Russian mafia gangster told him that he wanted him to say that he didn't mention the chief, did he? And now this guy goes on to spin his story that, I talked about proper ways to do it, but didn't mention the chief choking the guy. Yes, he did.
All right, I think I got that. And in the report that I do, I'll make sure that I include this part that you did not intend to throw the chief under the bus with Adrian on that part. Okay. All right.
Cringe.
Next piece, Brian.
I want to kind of loop back to your conversation with Jarvie. How many times did you and Sergeant Jarvie discuss this incident or this concern that I guess you had? You mentioned the one time in his office. Was there other times?
Like up to this point?
Yeah.
Or
sure.
How many times did you talk to other people about the chief? How many times did the conversations happen?
It's come up again, yeah. So that happened. Thanks. That happened when it happened, and then to my recollection, it didn't come up for a long time again until I was given a heads up. Hey, this investigation's happening.
So just your initial meeting with him in the office, and then nothing for a considerable amount of time until you heard that, okay, yeah, something's going to come of this.
Right. I mean, I think it was July when Chief went on leave, wasn't it? Or late June or July.
Somewhere about that. So there was no more conversation, just that one time. You didn't have any other conversations at the office, out on the street, during a break, anything like that?
Not that I remember, no, because.
So there was just this one conversation that one time, right? No, of course not.
I remember when it came back up, I had almost kind of I thought that was dead in the water, and because of the time between when I initially talked to him, when he was giving me the heads up, hey, this is happening.
Okay.
So I don't believe there was any more conversation about it.
Okay, so you kind of thought that the whole thing had just kind of gone away, and it was kind of a surprise when it kind of come back around?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So
it was kind of a surprise it came back around. The guy was disturbed about it. He went to his superior, reported it, told the guy he was training, it's the wrong way to do it. Don't choke people. He's surprised it came back around. And he goes, no, he's not.
When you sat with Sergeant Jarvie in his office, shared your concern, because this is what, then what was your understanding of what was going to happen from there?
There was no expectation of anything else to happen.
Okay. So
My-
he didn't
my
say,
understanding
well,
of
I'll
my-
go and do this or that or anything like that.
He definitely gave no statement of this is going to happen next. There was also no statement of, nothing's going to happen with this. So I don't know if, I'm assuming it was like, okay, thanks, I'll look into it kind of thing. There was definitely no promise of action. I remember that much. So.
And from you, was there any statement as far as like, this has got to be fill in the blank? I don't know what it would be, but was there an expectation on your part?
No.
It's like,
No.
did it be handled a certain way or?
No, I made it clear from the beginning that I was doing what I felt like I was obligated to do. And that was where that's why I was having that conversation, because policy said that. And so I was fulfilling policy. Policy said report it to the supervisor. So I made that clear. This is me reporting it to you. I'm done with it.
I'm not doing this because it's wrong to choke another guy. I'm doing this because the new George Floyd policy said you can't choke anybody. So I'm just covering my own booty.
So in the interview with DPS, and I don't have anything against you, I don't, but there's this one part in the interview with DPS that confuses me. So you end up saying they ask you a few times about your concerns and whether you felt like there was excessive use of force. And you said that you were concerned, but based on your perspective of where you were, because you were back and not up right front, you didn't see anything that led up to that choking, however it's characterized. And so it might have been justified. You just didn't see that. You just saw Dave Booth's hand on Rodriguez's neck.
Okay, this is it at 45 minutes, 45 to 50, 50 to 55. This is where Rigby comes out of his box.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if
I remember that. I remember saying that. Yeah.
I don't want to get that part wrong. So to me, and here's the issue that I have, is that you're trying to say it on both sides, fence it. Say, I was concerned, but really I had no reason to be concerned because I didn't see the full thing of what happened.
I disagree with that. I think that
help us understand.
I was making it clear that based on what I saw, from my perspective, I observed excessive force. I was also recognizing that excessive force is not determined by my perspective. That's what it was. It's as simple as that. I was, especially where that was a criminal investigation. So I'm not going to sit there, obviously I'm going to be honest, and this is what I saw, and I explained what I saw. And so I made that statement to acknowledge that knowing what I saw is this perspective. And so maybe I'll clarify to you then. I do not believe that there was anything that warranted that. But I also acknowledge that it is a possibility that something could have happened that I didn't see. That's a possibility.
So you don't believe, help me understand that it warranted that. What's that?
What Chief did, what I saw.
You don't believe there was anything that warranted Booth taking his hand and putting it on Rigby's
So I didn't directly observe anything that warranted it. So I can definitely say that because that's my observations, right? And from where I was, which was close, it was, behind Adrian, but still close. I don't really, there's no way that it didn't seem likely to me that something would have warranted it. I'm just acknowledging that I'm not, all seeing and all knowing.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So that does help us because now we know clearly that you think that Dave Booth used excessive use of force.
Yeah, and if I didn't, it would have just died.
At the same time, you're trying to acknowledge the fact that this is one perspective and there could be other perspectives.
Right.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's talk for a minute then about the perspective. So, I don't expect you to agree with it. In people's situations like this, I would expect them to do a counter to the whole thing and come up with the reasons why it's not that. But the bottom line
here's the deal.
Is that for both the criminal and the administrative review, there is no excessive use of force. And so your perception is wrong. And so you'll just have to figure out how best to go about that from here on out. I could go into more detail about why that is. I don't want to kind of belabor the point when the main thing is knowing that that's just not. You and anyone else that thinks that that's how it is, that might have been your perspective at the time, but it's been found to be false. So there was no excessive use of force. So I don't know if it helps you at this point in time to have me explain why that. Sure. Okay. So the overall thing, and you'd have to go through policy. So we could sum here, but I don't want to take all your time. You only have 2 hours. If you want me to go through policy, I will. But the bottom line is that in policy there's formal complaints and there's informal complaints. Also, when it comes to, and each one you're supposed to follow a certain way of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're coming to your sergeant and doing a formal complaint, there's certain things that are supposed to happen. So it says in policy that you're supposed to come immediately. And so I don't know that you coming within a few days is immediate, but I think it's pretty close. I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, I was going to say, is enough time for me to read the policy and figure out what I'm supposed to do and then do it,
I think
considered immediately?
Yes.
I mean, I felt like I was
doing the best you can.
Yeah.
So that's one issue. It's got to be written. So you've got to do a written statement on what your concern is.
So I guess let me ask this. That's obviously in a separate policy.
From what?
For the process to file a complaint, right? Is that the policy that you're...
Separate from use of force in 2 different places, you mean?
Well, because the policy that I came across was policy that I was doing what I was doing, and hopefully you have it, you probably have it, is...
So there's use of force.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was doing right there, is that orange paragraph. That's what I was doing. It says report. So I wasn't filing a formal complaint on chief. That's not what I was doing. I was satisfying that highlighted part right there. And I didn't even read the formal complaint policy because that's not what I was doing.
Okay. Well, and we're not here trying to point fingers on, oh, well, you're supposed to look at this one also. But the bottom line is, I mean, all policy is together, whether you know about it or not. So yeah, you'd want to go to the complaint piece. Most of the policy is focusing on when citizens want to make a complaint on an officer. But there are parts in there that help someone in your situation know how to go about it.
Most of it's for citizens. There are some parts in there for people in your situation.
Your situation know how to go about this. And so I don't feel like we're here trying to make a deal of that. You just need to know that there's an immediate requirement, and that there's a documentation requirement, and anything that evidence-wise that exists, to take it and to do what you can. I know in this situation that there's questions having to do with the video and whether it's accessible or not.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not here trying to get in the middle of that stuff. But overall, that is what you're trying to do. You're not trying to be, as an officer or as an FTO officer or as a sergeant, you're not trying to do an investigation that so-and-so just brought you, then pass it on. So you're informing the proper supervisors, you're finding out what they want to have happen.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, then they get the right people involved that they want to have involved.
Yeah.
So just don't want anyone thinking, and again, this is something that you can take to the bank. It's not just what I think or how we run things here in the sheriff's office or something like that. I'm speaking for the police department when I say that when there is a concern that someone raises, or a complaint, you can use them interchangeably, that someone raises, it immediately needs to go to the proper supervisor.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got to be documented. So citizens sometimes don't want to document. They think that they can be anonymous. Officers don't get to be anonymous. So they work for an employer. If they have a concern about how something was done, then they have a duty to report it.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that duty is to document it.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got to do it. It's just part of the rules.
Good.
Okay, more on the excessive use of force piece. So in this situation, it's not, what Dave Booth did is not even use of force. Now, people might disagree with that, but in politics.
Did you hear what he just said? What Dave Booth did isn't even use of force. It gets worse. Is anybody else cringing? It's just cringe after cringe. This guy's so creepy and slimy and just wanting to protect pigs. So gross.
Force. Now, people Booth did is not even, in this situation, it's not, what Dave Booth did is not even use of force. Now, people might disagree with that, but in policy, it's saying here, the application of physical technique or tactic. So it's like, okay, so what did Dave do? I think that what's an issue is with his right hand, he took it and put it on Rodriguez's neck and squeezed. I don't know if there's a dispute on what that technique or tactic is. Okay, technique or tactic. So were we taught to do that somehow in any of our trainings? Grab someone by the throat and do that kind of a thing? So the application of physical technique or tactic, chemical agent, or a weapon to another person. It's not a use of force when a person allows himself or herself to be searched, escorted, or handcuffed. So by the definition, if you're not taught the technique or tactic, it's not a use of force. Now, there can be some definition, escorted, or handcuffed.
Listen.
So by the definition, if you're not taught the technique or tactic, it's not a use of force. Now, there can be some disagreement on whether that policy is right or not, or whether it ought to include some more things.
Okay, so I mean, the statement you just made, if I punch somebody in the throat, but I've never been taught to do that, then that's not a use of force. Is that
So in your
And
trainings,
maybe I'm misunderstanding you because your
your
statement sounds
trainings-
ridiculous to me.
in your trainings, you've never been taught to punch someone?
Not in the throat, no. Like, we've been taught to grab people, but we've never been taught to grab people by the throat. So, it's what it,
Yeah, right.
how specific are you going to be
That's
on
my
it?
point,
But
is that you've never been taught to grab someone by the throat. So you have to take.
we've been taught specifically to not grab people by the throat.
No, I disagree. You've been taught to not do a chokehold.
Okay.
And then when it comes down to what a chokehold is, it comes down to blood flow or airflow. So then what you end up looking at is whether the circumstances that surround that issue.
This guy's such a jackass. It takes a millisecond. It takes 1 second to knock somebody unconscious by squeezing their throat.
So a chokehold is more one of these things.
Yeah. Well, I don't want it to appear that I'm trying to argue to the point that I think Chief is guilty of something. Because I did not ever want to be in this situation in the first place, and I'm not the one trying to say he needs to whatever. I don't like this situation. And I don't like that I'm in it. It's crappy. But I thought a lot about it, and I made a very informed decision, and I'm a very experienced officer, and I read case law, and I read lawsuits, and I know what is appropriate use of force. Or my perspective of what appropriate use of force is. Obviously, I'm not the one who determines it, and it was determined that it wasn't. And I understand all of that.
Did you hear that double talk? Listen, because he told him that he wasn't the one to determine use of force. His brain, though, says, I saw excessive use of force, but I learned now that I don't determine excessive use of force. Literally, he says that in a loop right here. Listen.
But I thought a lot about it, and I made a very informed decision, and I'm a very experienced officer, and I read case law, and I read lawsuits, and I know what is appropriate use of force, or my perspective of what appropriate use of force is. Obviously, I'm not the one who determines it, and it was determined that it wasn't. And I understand all of that. But what you're saying is not changing my perspective of what I saw. Nothing's going to change that. That's why we're here, right?
Yeah. Well,
because
Lucas, it really comes down to the future, your future in the police department.
Sure.
So you can dig in your heels and say,
and that's not what I'm doing.
This is how I feel, and no one's going to change. And okay, that's your decision. You just won't get any trusted positions having to do with DT and use of force and sergeant and those kinds of things because you're not willing to learn and be open-minded to it.
Sure.
Be open-minded. You're not willing to learn and be open-minded to watching people choke other people, and you keep your damn mouth shut. We're going to find out who you talk to, where you talk to them, how long you talked to them for. Did you have more than one conversation with them? Then they're going to go back to those guys and say, don't you ever do what this cop did. Just disgusting. And the 5 cops on that board were the ones who put his name up and wouldn't nominate anybody else. When they said, let's consider more candidates, the other pig said, no, him, because Rigby toes the thin blue line. Just disgusting to listen to this. And then this cop who's trying to be good, he's still willing to fall into the cookie cutter. He's so willing to say, you're right. And if just watch his mannerisms, watch the way this guy acts like a Russian Gestapo gangster.
Just trying to help you understand that Lexipol and the attorneys that wrote it, the prosecutors that reviewed the criminal case and fit it within the statute and how it fits into the policy. And then us going through this as well. Everyone's saying what happened there is not a use of force. And so the reason is because of
that's even scarier. Everyone is saying it's not a use of force. He choked a dude. It was so excessive that this piggy who didn't want to tell told. He thought about it for a long time, been a cop for a long time, came to his decision, and he's saying everybody who's official that's above him all looked at it and said it wasn't a use of force.
The circumstances that surround it all Yes, it's not a technique or tactic, but that's only one part. The other pieces have to do with it was incidental. So I don't know if anyone had a chance. I'll just speak about you specifically. You didn't look at the camera pieces. I'm not saying that you needed to, but when you look at the recordings of what happened and you go frame by frame, you have Jesse James Rodriguez who actually sits down in the vehicle. They're moving him. He's going back and forth at points. He is compliant. He's not. He wants to go a different direction. It's gradient level of compliance. It's not like you're all 100% compliant or 100% not compliant.
Right.
It's this kind of level of how that works. So point is, Jesse James Rodriguez goes and sits in the vehicle. They get him in the vehicle. Now he decides he wants to come out. So now he's being some level of non-compliant. So he's coming out, he's leading with his head, and he and Dave Booth are now like this. And whether he doesn't make statements about kissing him until later, but at this point in time, he's known to be a spitter. Dave Booth is wondering whether he's going to bite him. Dave Booth takes him and pushes him, and it hits him higher, somewhere in through here. And pushes him back in, separating space. And then from there, Rodriguez comes out again. And that's when Dave Booth's hand catches him here, and he's pushing him back in. Now, when I say incidental, this is one frame. You can go frame, frame by frame. Here, his hand isn't there. Here, his hand is there. Here, his hand isn't there. And so you have to figure out the timing of that video, but this is something like 1 to 2 seconds.
I was gonna say, what is the time? So 1 to 2?
Yeah, it's 1 to 2 seconds. And even
like I said, my guess was under 5, but yeah.
Yeah, we said that with DPS. So it's this incidental kind of a thing. Then Jesse James Rodriguez, he's coming back out of the vehicle a third time. And this is when Adrian and others are all now trying to help with the whole situation. And Adrian's grabbing him by the feet, and they actually get him in there, and the door shuts. And so when I say incidental, it's like the first time, that's not what Dave Booth was doing.
Right.
The second time, that's what happened. And the third time, that's not what was doing either, because now it's down lower. And so none of us knows for sure, did Dave intentionally on that go around grab him by the throat? That's what he was after, and put him in there.
Right.
But you end up having to look at the overall thing and say, well,
he says, none of us know for sure. He did know for sure. That's why he complained. And give me my hand, 5 seconds on your throat. I can knock you unconscious.
Didn't do it the first time, and he didn't do it the third time. And you also have the throat. That's what he was after, and put him in there.
Right.
But you end up having to look at the overall thing and say, well, he didn't do it the first time, and he didn't do it the third time. And you also have this arrestee, and he's in cuffs, and that's an important piece to make. Some people are using that to say, therefore, he shouldn't have had someone put his hand on his throat. But the point is he's fighting.
You think if he's in cuffs, you shouldn't put your hand on his throat? Wow. That's a concept.
He's resisting, and he's continuing to come out and out and out. Dave Booth some people are using that to say, therefore, he shouldn't have had someone put his hand on his throat. But the point is he's fighting, he's resisting, and he's resisting to come out and out and out. Dave Booth is, whether people agree with it or not, the final decision is Dave Booth is doing the best he can to get this guy in there. And this whole thing was unintended. It was unintentional. It was incidental. It was inconsequential because there's no loss of anything. You don't see anything happening with all of that. So in the future if we can go there for a second, in the future, the issue really comes down to not whether someone's hand was on someone's throat. It has to do with Was it intentional?
Mhm.
Was it
Oh.
a tactic?
Mhm.
Was it a technique? It's
Cop-splaining. He's been a sheriff for 20 years. Cop-splaining to this young copper how to make sure that you don't complain about other people. And if anything ever happens your way, you know how to get out of it.
being used against another. Here, we're not even technically affecting an arrest. I mean, overall, you could say that's what they're doing, but they're really not. They already arrested him.
Right.
What they're doing now is they're escorting or transporting,
Mhm.
and that's in policy. And so
That's what the cop did to me when he squeezed my arm. My bruise still there. He was escorting or transporting, so the policy's okay to grab you and hurt you during that time period.
Right.
what they're doing now is they're escorting or transporting, and that's in policy. And so it's not so much use of force to make an arrest, although there's an argument that the whole thing from the time you take him from the house to the time you get him to the jail is arrest. I acknowledge that.
Oh, do you? Thanks.
Policy gets even more specific. And when it starts talking about escorting and transporting, then it's like, well, it seems like the policy distinguishes.
Then you can choke people. If you're escorting or transporting, you can choke people because he was already arrested. So the choking is just the escorting or transporting.
Between arrest, escort, transport. And so the bottom line here, the decision here is it doesn't even rise to the level of use of force because it doesn't meet the definition. Maybe it needs to be changed. Heber City ought to go through that if they think that it does.
Yeah, maybe Heber City ought to go through that you can't grab a guy's throat and squeeze it when he's in torture cuffs. Maybe Heber City should look at the torture cuffs.
But by circumstances, it also does not. It's not a technique. It was only incidental. It was only used for 1 or 2 seconds. It was only one frame on it.
My fist only hits you for 1 second. It's only a second. Hit you one time real quick. Squeeze, only a second. By the way, this video doesn't go on this longer. He writes out a statement for about 15 minutes. I'll fast forward through that.
The video, things like that. And in the courts, and it was only used for 1 or 2 seconds. It was only one frame on a video, things like that.
Let's see the video.
In the courts and the attorneys and admin, they want to give cops the benefit of the doubt. Because when you're in it with someone and all of a sudden my forearm hit him in the neck and now it could have cut off some airway for some amount of time.
Right.
So it is concerning when you do see an officer hand on someone's throat and that it's gripped. I'd say that it's like,
And
man,
that,
that's
and that was
concern.
my concern.
That's the concern. It's just once you, and it's kind of like pulling a trigger and then it's all second guessed forevermore. So once you actually go through the process and it ends up being, this isn't one.
Wasatch County, I'm not sure how to say the name. You have to get rid of this guy. He's such a pig. If your brother or your cousin or your best friend or your lover gets beaten, tortured, abused, or killed by the cops, this is the guy who's the head person in charge.
Valid to be concerned about it because it's this, but in the end, it's not. Okay, where do we need to go next?
I just want to mention one thing. I've known you for a long time, Lucas, and you're very confident, and I trust you. You know, if I have to go into a building, I want you on my back. And I think it's awesome that you researched. You took your time and you researched, but you didn't go that extra step. I think if you would have went that extra step, watched the video, I think your mind would be changed on this. Definitely. I really do. So maybe in the future, take it one more step.
So was that video even mine to watch? Was that my body cam that showed that, or was it the cage cam in Adrian's car? This obviously doesn't matter. I'm just curious.
So it's not Adrian's because his fell off, right?
Right. His body camera fell off. Then there would have been one in the vehicle, then my camera.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the one that's in the vehicle.
You see that? He questioned the emperor for a second about seeing the video, and the tone changed back to cold.
So it's not Adrian's because his fell off.
Was that my body cam that showed that, or was it the cage cam?
Watch him. Watch him.
This obviously doesn't matter. I'm just curious.
So it's not Adrian's because his fell off, right?
Right. His body camera fell off. Then there would have been one in the vehicle, then my camera.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the one that's
okay.
So overall, and I agree with what Brian's saying, another piece you have to read into that, though, another piece of policy you have to read into that, is that there's no requirement to do that work before you go to your supervisor. So when you saw the concerning thing and it concerned you, it bugged you, that's the time to go and do it. Now, as all of this progresses, right, then that continued work to try to figure out where things are at, that helps.
Can you appreciate that this situation was changed by who it was? If this had been another officer, that probably, and I don't know because it wasn't, but that probably would have been the conversation immediately. It made things different because of who it was. It made things very serious immediately in my mind.
And I'm not
and that's why
I'm not through with the investigation, so I guess it's not fair for me to answer the question at this point in time, but
wait a minute. He already said the investigations are over. Everybody's already determined there was no criminal wrongdoing. He just keeps on lying and double talking over himself.
I appreciate you raising the question with it because I think you have a valid point.
Sure. From the beginning of all of it, I was trying to do the right thing. That's what I always try to do. I don't think anybody can question my integrity in anything I've done in this job, and I stand by that. And I was extra trying to do the right thing because it was my chief.
This guy sits here and talks about his integrity. You're a scumbag, dude. You're a piece of shit. You take people to dungeons. You put people in torture cuffs. You're one of the worst people on earth, not just here in America, on earth. You're more likely to go to prison here than in China or Iran. That's a fact. This guy's a disgusting maggot. I've kept my integrity. You're the devil, brother. And if you didn't know it, let me be the first to tell you.
And so what I still, the reservation or me holding back just a little bit is that to some extent, the more you trust someone, the less concerned you are with the issue. So, I don't know. Some people might take what I just said to say, oh, so we should sweep that under the rug. No. If you feel concerned about it, you should raise it. But to some extent, someone that has a lot of years experience, or that's their expertise or blah, 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 you've had a lot of experience with them. Yeah, it can be more, I mean, nobody wrote reports on this thing. Nobody went to the county attorneys on this thing. So there's just different indicators that's like, well, everyone was focusing on Richard Christ and Jesse James Rodriguez. That's where the issue that's where the use of force was.
Right.
Because that did involve technique and tactic.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's a good point.
So Jesse Rodriguez has been beaten before. So Jesse, so what now, I don't know what he said about sweeping under the rug, but so then Jesse James Rodriguez had been beaten before. He's bringing up an incident previously where Jesse James Rodriguez was abused by police And then this guy said earlier in the interview, because it's Jesse James Rodriguez. And so then the captain of that police department choked him as well. Jesse James Rodriguez, I'd love to talk to you, brother. I'd love to know the whole story here. I mean, I've got the whole, we can all see the thin blue line being frayed right in front of us. But I'd like to talk to Jesse James Rodriguez, that's for sure.
Here we are. So one thing that we're going to need from you is a written statement on your feelings about this excessive use of force. So we're not asking you to agree with us.
Mm-hmm.
We're asking you to put yourself back in the spot of when this happened. And that's what we need to do, is to document this thing. And so you had a concern. And when you go and raise it with Jason Jarvie, and then a report being done, hey, on this day or time, or at least the best of your recollection, I went to Jason Jarvie. I spoke to him about these things. My concern is this. We don't want to, other people can try to make it that it's some other concern. So that's why this matters, is that's what your concern is. It's not any of these other things that people end up using for their own benefit. That's really the issue. It's like, what's your concern? You brought it up to your sergeant. So why did you go to him? Let's get it on paper. Some other things to know here. So our instruction to you is to not talk to anyone about our conversation. Now, if you end up speaking with a spouse, it doesn't matter. But the concern is with other officers. Sometimes people want to have an attorney. Okay, I'm not saying you can't speak to an attorney, but I'm saying you're not supposed to go out and speak with friends or the media or, other officers, whether they're in your agency or not. If you needed to talk with someone because of the stress of all of it, you go and you talk to, that's the professional you talk to. You can talk to doctors, you can talk to attorneys, all of those things. It's just, so I'm going to call a trusted source within law enforcement. No, you're not going to do that.
Whoa.
At some point in time, all that's lifted. But at this point, we still have more people to interview. And we don't want the information to be shared.
Oh my God, this guy is such Gestapo. They don't have any more people to interview. There was only him and Adrian and the captain there. He said there was only 3 of us there. There's not more people to interview. And then if you have a problem at work, don't go to a trusted partner in your business. Don't do that. Don't get a perspective from someone else who has your job. Don't you do that. You go talk to a cop therapist. That's what they're for. So you don't go infect the pool with your idea of being good and standing up for people when you see them get choked. You do not even determine what appropriate or inappropriate use of force is. Dude, the people of that county, get rid of this guy Rigby. What a scumbag. I told you, I mean, you guys have no idea. It's the middle of the night. I had to get this done. And there's a Terry V. Ohio video that I'm going on next, but you guys had to see the thin blue line absolutely exposed.
I don't know if you feel best about writing this statement on an actual witness statement, or you're going to write it out on a lined piece of paper, or what you're going to do. But
either fine.
But we need that statement to change, that you saw a perspective one way, you had a concern, we addressed the concern, and your concern is over. That's what he wants here.
Okay, give me a sec while I go over.
Look at him. Look at that guy.
So I guess I'm not fully, I mean, my statement's been clear from the beginning. So what's happening by me writing it down?
That's what policy requires.
Right. That's what he has to say. What he wants him to do is rewrite it. And so then the copper says, I already wrote my statement. He wanted him to rewrite it. He already prefaced it by saying, you had some concerns, you came in, we addressed them. Now he wants him to rewrite the statement that everything's hunky-dory, that he didn't see it properly because he didn't see the video.
For what?
To document it.
To document me filing a formal complaint, or?
To document your concern. We have a recording, right?
Mm-hmm.
We got the DPS recording.
Yeah.
The thing about recordings is that people can end up saying that that was a question and then it prompted a response. And so you got the response you wanted because you asked that question.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's more of a, we're controlling this conversation and you just have to submit to it. It's like, okay, I disagree, but all right. A statement is more, hey, you have a concern, right? You went to Jason Jarvie, you raised a concern.
Mm-hmm.
So on your own, when you write out what your concern is, now the department knows that that's how you feel. So in your case, it might be exactly the same as what you've stated here. But things have a way of changing over time when attorneys or others get involved. You're not in trouble here, even after some of the stuff that we've talked about and explained. You're not in trouble.
Even after some of the stuff we talked about and explained, he's telling him your perception may have changed.
To expect disciplinaries from this. Now, when I say that, we are not the decision makers.
Right.
So we take what we found, we turn it over to the mayor and the manager, and they take it from there. But my feeling is that there's not disciplinaries that ought to be handed.
You know, I'm sorry. Let me pause it. I'm going to run this back. I know this has been a long video. Let me run back this blurb from Rigby here. This is Russian Gestapo all day. This is, I mean, just listen to this minute again and listen to how he goes one way, but then it could go the other way. And then one way, but it could go the other way. But then one way, it could go the other way though. I mean, this is just pure tyranny. Like this is your boss. This is who you have to deal with. This is the guy who's in charge of you. Remember, and this guy was going for the post, which is for the training for all officers. If they have any complaints, if they have any problems, he was going to be the guy. He was going to be the guy. Wow.
And you just have to submit to it.
So this is where he's talking about the difference between a statement and a conversation.
It's more of a, we're controlling this conversation. And you just have to submit to it.
To the conversation. Now listen to this part.
I disagree, but all right. A statement is more, hey, you have a concern, right? You went to Jason Jarvie, you raised a concern.
Mm-hmm.
So on your own, when you write out what your concern is, now the department knows that that's how you feel. So in your case, it might be exactly the same as what you've stated here. But things have a way of changing over time when attorneys or others get involved. You're not in trouble here, even after some of the stuff that we've talked about and explained. You're not in trouble. You don't need to expect disciplinaries. When I say that, we are not the decision makers. So we take what we found, we turn it over to the mayor and the manager, and they take it from there. But my feeling is that there's not disciplinaries that ought to be handed down. We went through some explanation, some what you might call counseling or something along those lines, some correction of, no, Lucas, we disagree with you. It's like this.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you were vocal, that's all wrong. They're completely wrong. This is how we're going to go ahead. You want to start training people that way. You want to start talking to people inside your crew that's when it's going to cause issues.
Mm-hmm.
But just because we have a conversation here about, hey, Lucas, that might have been your perception, but just so you know, this is the determination. You're going to have to wrap your mind around it, and then from here on out, move in that direction at least.
Oh my fucking God.
That's what it's meant to be.
Oh my God.
The written part is just meant to, because we have a conversation here about, hey, Lucas, that might have been your perception, but just so you know, this is the determination. You're going to have to wrap your mind around it, and then from here on out, move in that direction, at least if you're going to work for Heber.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's meant to be. So the written part is just meant to say what you say. We're not telling you what to say.
See if you learned anything. We need you to change your statement. Wow. This is just criminal.
But your concern was, so such and such, and you went to Jason Jarvie, so at least that much ought to be in there. But then we're out of it.
You had a concern, we just want it written. What was your concern?
It's what your policy
Simple as that.
requires.
He had just told him maybe your perspective changed after your lawyer got involved or other people like him.
That's what we're doing here.
You're sweeping this under the rug and you're checking this guy is what you're doing here. Making sure he's going to toe the thin blue line.
As a policy.
As a policy.
Policy review. And IA.
So can I ask, like, I realize you're telling me that I'm not in trouble, but you're not the one who gets me in trouble.
Yeah.
So I guess what is this? Like, what's the bigger picture of this? Because I felt like I did the right thing, and now I'm in way over my head.
So I don't think that you are. I know that that's how you feel. So I'll address
I'm right here. I mean, here we are.
Yeah,
I'm getting pulled out of trainings for IAs. So
I get it. So overall, yeah, you're in the middle of something that's not comfortable and you don't want to be. At the same time, this is one of the most difficult spots to be in.
You don't want to be here. This is one of the most difficult spots to be in. You don't want to be here. Wow. This is a bad guy.
Law enforcement, because there's very few other places where you work and they really care about this. And then what happened? And then what happened? And okay, and so we want you to do this and that, and it's all recorded, and all this kind of, right? Not many other employers, except for this industry, that really care about that stuff. Now, the bottom line is
here's the deal.
You're just going to have to trust. Maybe that's difficult to do, but that is what it comes down to. You're just going to have to trust that when we're saying, hey, policy requires this, you can go and look in policy and double check. But we're not asking you to do something that's not in policy.
Sure. Well, I mean, I guess am I the subject of this IA?
No.
Okay. So somebody else, obviously an IA is on a person. I mean,
they can, right, they can all start, and it can be a generalized thing.
Right.
But I'm also not trying to.
And obviously you're not going to tell me more information than that, but okay. So I'm not the subject of this.
And I'm not trying to pass this off as though this is just an IA and it could be anybody, anything. It is not generalized that way. No.
Okay.
But no, you're not a subject.
Okay.
Oh my God.
The only way,
oh my God. So Russian gangster, mafioso. I mean, he did it again.
But okay.
Listen.
So I'm not the subject of this.
And I'm not trying to pass this off as though this is just an IA and it could be anybody, anything. It is not generalized that way. No.
Okay.
But no, you're not a subject. The only way that you can get in trouble here is if you don't do what we ask you to do. So if we ask you a question and you don't want to give the answer, well, that hasn't happened here. That's going to cause you issues. We ask a question, you give an answer, we find out different that that's not how it was, that's going to cause you issues. I don't think that's happened here.
And I like to understand things, so I'm asking questions. I'm not trying to do
And that's
or
good.
anything. So.
Yep.
That's a good thing.
Yep, it really is. And then when it comes to any of these other follow-up things that we need, it's like, the speaking and not speaking to people, doing a statement or a report on the issue.
Wow, they've mentioned that he's not supposed to talk to anybody else so many times now.
Those are the follow-up things that we do.
Okay. Do you need a statement right now, or you want me to do
What's
that
going
on
to
my
be
own
best
time?
time, do you think?
Well, you've got a half hour before you leave. How long do you think it's going to take you to fill out a statement on this?
Not a half hour.
Not a half hour. Then let's just get it done and over with. Let's do it now. If that's okay with you.
Yeah, and to be clear, you want my written statement to be what my specific concern was that I brought forward to my supervisor.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep, put in the circumstances around there. I mean, but yeah.
Simple as that.
Put in the so listen carefully.
Simple as that.
Listen carefully. Listen carefully, because Rigby already told him there was other things going on. He was trying to get out. He was resisting. Then he says, we're not going to tell you how to write this, and they need to write it now during this interview so that these pigs can read it and see if this guy's going to fall in line. That's what's going on. And Rigby then will say, and I stopped it so you guys could hear it. He says, he says to him, I'll just let you listen to the words yourself.
Want my written statement to.
If that's okay with you.
Yeah, and to be clear, you want my written statement to be what my specific concern was that I brought forward to my supervisor.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep, put in the circumstances around there. I mean, but yeah.
Okay.
Simple as that.
Put in the circumstances around there that you didn't see everything that happened, that it could have been that appropriate amount of force was necessary, but it wasn't a use of force because it wasn't a tactic or something they taught.
I get a county statement.
Well, I mean, if you want to do it on a city statement, you can, but I just had that here in the office, so.
What's our policy say?
Statement.
I'm just kidding.
Statement. Written statement.
2103. I don't remember. I was
That's
gonna see
fine.
if I could
No,
remember it.
you're fine.
And you heard the Freudian slip earlier where he said, the only way you'll get in trouble is if you don't do what we ask you to do. That's what he said. And so now this guy's going to sit and write. I'm going to fast forward through this because we only got about 2 minutes of this video left. This video is almost done. So they're going to have him sit and write his statement right here because they want to make sure that he's changed his position. You've heard it. You heard the whole thing. I mean, this is going to be a 2-hour video. I'll even edit some stuff out that doesn't need to be here, but let's get to the end of it, though. There's only a couple minutes left.
Go on some stuff.
Do you have to?
Here's statute on an issue which I think helps you feel more comfortable on some stuff. So an employer may not take adverse action against an employee because the employee communicates in good faith. That's the main piece there. A violation of suspected violation of law.
Did you see this? Did you see this part right here? Watch. So this copper here with the wounded hand, he pulls his statement up to read it, but he realizes it's in front of the camera, and he's just going to distract. Uh-oh, it's in front of the camera. Watch him. Uh-oh, you see that? Watch him.
May not take adverse action against an employee because the employee communicates in good
It's
faith.
so obvious.
Green piece there. A violation of suspected violation of law. So you've done that, and it's in good faith. How do we know that? An employee is presumed to have communicated in good faith if the employee gives written notice. To a person in authority over the person alleged. So, and then there's this piece.
How do we know what Rigby is writing down on that piece of paper right there? How do we know? Because he's shaking the sound is off. You heard the reporters, but how do we know what he's actually saying to him right here? What he's actually writing down here?
An employer may not take adverse action against an employee because an employee participates or gives information in an investigation. So by doing that piece, and also by consenting to the interview as well, which I know it's required, but you get the good faith presumption. I think that's a great thing here.
Yep.
It shows everyone that you're just trying to do the best you can. You don't have anything against anyone. You're researching things. You're conscientious. You're wanting to help train employees. That's all you were doing. And I think we can say the same thing now. I don't feel any
I don't see a
different.
change, not at all.
So this is the Utah Protection of Public Employees Act. So separate from policy, state law keeps police department, Heber City themselves, or any supervisor or administrator from trying to somehow retaliate or treat you different. And so I'll make sure that in the report, I will come back to you if I'm concerned about something. But at this point, you can expect that in the report, it's like you came in good faith. You cooperated.
So Russian Gestapo. I mean, so listen, y'all, when you tell people two opposing ideas at the same time, and you are their boss, and you can fire them or even charge them with crimes, and then you tell them two different things, that is gaslighting somebody. What this cop is doing, Rigby, to his inferior, is he's gaslighting him. Listen to what he says here. I'll come back and I'll get you if I need to, but it's probably all done now. It's probably all done, but I'll come get you if I need to.
Or treat you different. And so I'll make sure that in the report, I will come back to you if I'm concerned about something.
I'll make sure in the report you're good. I'll come back to you if I need something.
But at this point, you can expect that in the report, it's like you came in good faith. You cooperated through the whole thing. It's not comfortable and everyone hates it.
Right.
And we do too. Let's try to move on. That's one thing. The other thing having to do with the definition of non-force, application of physical technique or tactic. Mentioned some other things about chemical agents or weapons, but use on another person. So those ones just don't apply. Okay, so what if? What if there ends up being a punch to the face? And
he just got done saying you're fine. Everything is fine. But what if? What if you get a punch to the face from this? For you saying something about one guy choking another guy that you work with. It's so twisted. I've watched this already. I've watched this already twice. Not all the way through twice, but 2 times I went through it. First time I watched it. This is disgusting. This is how you drive somebody who you work with crazy. Go to work to someone and say, like, hey, I'm thinking about picking up lunch tomorrow, but you want to bring something in maybe? It's literally gaslighting. If you don't know what gaslighting is, That's what Rigby is doing here. He's gaslighting him. It's disgusting. It really is.
Or chemical agents or weapons, but the use on another person. So those ones just don't apply. Okay, so what if there ends up being a punch to the face, and then someone's trying to see if that is a tactic or not? Or let's say they're kicking someone, or they've tackled someone, or whatever other kind of action an officer could take on someone else. And maybe we never actually got it covered there. So the overall thing is that's when the state statute would come into place. So is it an assault? Is it a threat? Is it some kind of a, one of those intimidation things? So state statute would apply at that point in time. So that's why in this situation, the criminal part needed to happen, because if doing this on someone's neck for maybe 2 seconds, 1 to 2 seconds doesn't fit within that, given that awesome different tactic. Mentioned some other things about chemical agents or weapons, but use on another person, so those ones just don't apply. Okay, so what if there ends up being a punch to the face, and then someone's trying to see if that is a tactic or not? Or let's say they're kicking someone, or they've tackled someone, or whatever other kind of action an officer could take on someone else. And maybe we never actually got it covered there. So the overall thing is that's when the state statute would come into place. So is it an assault? Is it a threat? Is it some kind of a, one of those intimidation things?
Yeah, because we all know that the state statutes are often applied to police officers and they're charged with assault or battery.
So state statute would apply at that point in time. So that's why in this situation, the criminal part needed to happen, because doing this on someone's neck for maybe 2 seconds, 1 to 2 seconds doesn't fit within that, given that it's in this fight situation, escorting, transporting, but it does fit within the assault statute or some other piece of the statute. And so if someone had done wrong, it would still be caught there.
Right.
And that is still covered under what you were doing here. And so I would say that if that's how you felt, and we know that that's how it is, don't think you did anything wrong.
Put a 1 in the chat if the only person who's ever seen their case tried for being choked is George Floyd. It's a criminal statute for him choking him that will never be applied to a piggy.
By sharing your concern.
Not at all.
Good thing to do. And I think that by saying that you're open to, there might have been other things going on, that's just, I didn't see those things. I just saw this concern. That's good. And just remember, policy requires immediate.
Did you hear that? He just told him exactly.
And I think that by saying that you're open to, there might have been other things going on, that's just, I didn't see those things. I just saw this concern. That's good. And just remember, policy requires immediate. I think that you're probably there. And then you go to your supervisor. If that supervisor's affected, then you go to the next supervisor.
Right.
We just can't have it be that it's like, oh, well, everyone in here can't be trusted. And so I'm just going to sit on them. And months are going to go by.
Mm-hmm.
That they're not. So you can always go to, it lists other people in here. You go to the Attorney General's office. You go to the law enforcement agency that has jurisdiction. You can go to, it names all the places that you can go. You can go to the manager, the mayor. In this case, there's no policy that says whether it's supposed to be the manager or the mayor, but the statute says that it's supposed to be the supervisor of the agency head or whoever is affected by that. So you don't get it all in one place. So, okay, I think you did well. Okay? Okay. May I shake your hand?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Sorry to take you from training. Sorry for the stress. It's not intentional. Thank you.
That was the fun part. I mean, the training.
Yeah.
The training.
We done?
Yeah, no, you're good. No, it's the training. The fun part is
Yeah, we get to go to the
going
hospital.
to go down to the hospital.
There's a delay in sound.
Thank you. Perception is wrong. It really comes down to the future, your future in the police department.
We couldn't just stand by and watch that happen.
We can't allow for any eroding of that public trust.
Wasatch County Sheriff Jared Rigby is no longer being considered to direct the training and investigating of Utah peace officers. Earlier this month, he was just hours away from being sworn in when state leaders, including Governor Cox, learned more about a Fox 13 News investigation showing a video of Sheriff Rigby allegedly bullying and intimidating a police officer.
You just won't get any trusted position.
I mean, doesn't that piss you off? They say that bullying, intimidating. No, absolutely. The reason why the institution of policing is ruined is because of these guys.
It's having to do with DT and use of force and sergeant and those kinds of things because you're not willing to learn and be open-minded to it.
Fox 13 News investigative reporter Adam Herbetz was at today's emergency meeting and has been following every step of this process. Adam joins us now live in studio with a look at what comes next.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Kelly, if Jared Rigby got this position, basically it would be his job to police the police. But today, a committee of his peers, including other chiefs and sheriffs, said they are no longer willing to move forward with his appointment. And now the search process is starting from scratch.
Do we have any further discussion?
This board spent more than 3 hours in closed session discussing the character of Sheriff Jared Rigby.
Those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
By the time they were finished, the vote was almost unanimous. Sevier County Sheriff Nate Curtis, the only man still supporting Rigby for a job he's no longer going to get.
Post is the backbone of all law enforcement. It is such a critical area and an opportunity to be able to guide and lead.
Commissioner Jess Anderson stopped Rigby's appointment from going through just days before his swearing-in ceremony because he was concerned with a bullying and intimidation complaint filed with the same agency Rigby was about to lead.
The only way that you can get in trouble here is if you don't do what we ask you to do.
Would you like me to watch all of it? Or?
At first, the sheriff refused to answer questions. Last month, we showed him the video, and he had no comment. Today, he also had nothing to say.
Well, there's no animosity with Sheriff Rigby. Again, he's a good man. He does a fine job, does a great job up in Wasatch County. I was able to shake his hand and wish him well, but at the same time, it's in the best interest of the state to be able to move forward.
We couldn't just stand by and watch that happen.
Scott Stevenson is the executive director of Utah's largest police union. His retirement last year is the reason the post director job is open. He says the state made the right decision.
These are all educated individuals and they're always aware of what's going on around them. If they read the news, then they can't avoid what the work you've done.
Now the committee is starting over from scratch. The commissioner says these are the qualities he's looking for.
Someone who has the utmost integrity, the ability to make good decisions and judgments, and also being impartial and unbiased in every which way. We can't allow for any eroding of that public trust.
If we felt like he checked all those boxes, we would not have asked the governor to halt the process.
So even though the sheriff had no comment today, we do know from his emails that he's planning on filing a lawsuit against the state, or at least he planned on doing that a few weeks ago, for violating hiring and employment laws. of course, we'll keep you updated when we know more about that.
Adam, your first story on the sheriff was several months ago. Do you think you would have the job today if your first story wasn't aired?
Well, really, our first story was in 2021, and then we kind of brought it back up just about a month ago. Would he have gotten the job today? I don't know. I mean, they don't tell us what happens in closed session, but we do know the reason his swearing-in ceremony was postponed was in anticipation of our story. So definitely played a role, I think.
100% it did. They said there can be, all the guys were like, there can be absolutely no eroding of the public trust. Remember this? They talk about the erosion of public trust. What is this right here? The erosion of public trust is already there. They put cops on the board to appoint cops. And then the council member said that they just decided it was Rigby because they're all the same. They know who Rigby is. If they've been cops for decades and decades, then they know. I want to be on the record that I felt the entire process recommendation of Rigby was completely rigged. It was a setup from the get-go. For me, it's all about the principle of the process. The erosion of public trust, hey guys, it's gone. There's regular people who are not criminals that aren't break into places, aren't recovering drug addicts or never were drug addicts, didn't get lost. Because this system has to change. And as you can see, there was an entire community of people, a whole community of people who showed up for Rigby and said what an amazing, great, good person he was. How many people in Salt Lake City got abused by cops when Rigby was in charge and sheriff and went and filed a complaint with Rigby? How many people said that cop just stuck his knee in my dad's neck and went to Rigby and Rigby said, okay, we'll take a look at it? How many people did Rigby toe the thin blue line right across their life? The thin blue line has been exposed. Share this video. Delete Lawz, folks. Delete Lawz. I'll see you guys on the next one. Later, Gators.